Imagine a man standing at the altar, his chest filled with pride, his spirit alive with dreams. In that moment, he feels like the architect of his own destiny. The world seems to whisper, "Here is a man stepping into love, partnership, and purpose." But fast forward a few years, sometimes only months, and the very same man looks at his reflection and feels a quiet estrangement. The fire in his eyes has dimmed. He no longer recognizes the posture of strength he once carried. What happened? The tragedy isn't sudden. It's slow, almost invisible. Men rarely wake up one morning and declare, "I've lost my self-respect." Instead, it dissolves drop by drop in compromises so small they almost feel noble at first. He tells himself this is what a good husband does. He silences his opinions to keep the peace. He takes on burdens without acknowledgement. He swallows resentment because expressing it might feel selfish or unmanly. And little by little, the man who once stood tall begins to shrink inside his own life. There is an unsettling paradox here. Marriage, which promises companionship and growth, can also become the quiet graveyard of a man's individuality. Not because marriage itself is doomed, but because many men enter it without understanding how easily their identity can erode when they confuse love with self-erasure. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Yet, many men trade this acceptance for conditional validation, hoping their silence, sacrifice, or endless agreeableness will earn them love. Instead, it leaves them hollow. A man without self-respect may still function. He goes to work, pays bills, attends family gatherings, but inside, he feels displaced from his own life. This erosion doesn't happen because his wife is cruel, nor because he is weak in some obvious way. It happens because he forgets that respect must first be inward before it can ever be outward. When he compromises his values in exchange for temporary harmony, when he abandons his boundaries for the illusion of stability, he begins a silent betrayal against himself. Consider the countless men who become background characters in their own homes. They live in service to the needs of everyone else, believing this makes them strong providers, yet they secretly wonder why they feel invisible. The respect they crave from their spouse, their children, and even society slips further away, not because others necessarily diminish them, but because they have diminished themselves first. And here lies the dangerous cycle. The less respect a man shows himself, the more he seeks approval from others. The more he seeks approval, the less authentic he becomes. What began as an act of love transforms into a theater of appeasement, where the role he plays slowly consumes the man he is. But this is not the whole story. Beneath the erosion, beneath the buried fragments of self, there remains an ember. A man may feel lost, but he is not destroyed. The respect he once carried can be reclaimed, but only if he is willing to confront uncomfortable truths. He must see how he participated in his own diminishment, how silence became complicity, and how his desire to avoid conflict often became a deeper conflict within himself. The path to reclaiming self-respect is not about defiance against marriage, nor about dominance over one's partner. It is about awakening. It is about remembering that respect begins not with being loved by another, but by refusing to betray one's own soul. This is the beginning of the journey, a painful recognition, but a necessary one. To understand how men lose their self-respect in marriage, we must first acknowledge the hidden ways it is surrendered. And in the next step, we will dissect the subtle patterns, the unspoken habits, and the psychological traps that slowly strip men of the dignity they once carried so proudly. If the loss of self-respect were loud, men would resist it. If it arrived as an obvious tyrant, they would fight. But the reality is far more insidious. It creeps in through patterns so subtle that they masquerade as love, duty, or responsibility. These patterns become the architecture of a man's slow undoing. The first pattern is confusing peace with silence. In the beginning, a man tells himself that avoiding conflict is a sign of maturity. He swallows his frustrations, convinces himself that keeping the peace is noble, and assures himself that real men don't complain. But over time, silence becomes submission, and submission corrodes respect. A marriage without honest friction doesn't produce peace. It produces a quiet resentment that rots beneath the surface. The man's voice fades, and with it, his sense of self. The second pattern is deriving worth solely from provision. Many men tether their identity to being providers. They believe that if they work long hours, pay the bills, and ensure material security, they are fulfilling their ultimate role. And while provision is vital, it is not the essence of masculinity. When a man reduces himself to a paycheck, he forfeits the deeper dimensions of his humanity. His creativity, his individuality, his inner fire. Soon, he realizes that though he provides for everyone, no one truly sees him. The third pattern is confusing love with appeasement. Out of fear of losing affection, a man bends, adjusts, and concedes. He starts to believe that love must be earned through constant sacrifice. But this kind of love is conditional, and conditional love always demands another compromise tomorrow. Over time, the man becomes less a partner and more a servant in disguise, hoping that endless giving will one day secure the validation he craves. And then there is the fourth, perhaps most dangerous pattern, self-betrayal disguised as loyalty. A man convinces himself that by putting his partner's needs above his own, always without exception, he is demonstrating devotion. But in truth, he is abandoning himself. Loyalty to another cannot replace loyalty to one's own values, boundaries, and dignity. A man who betrays himself in the name of loyalty is not truly loyal at all. He is merely complicit in his own erasure. These patterns thrive because they seem virtuous on the surface. They are reinforced by cultural narratives that tell men to man up, take it on the chin, or keep her happy no matter what. Society often praises the man who sacrifices everything for his family, but rarely asks what happens when that sacrifice devours his very sense of self. Friedrich Nietzsche warned, "He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises." The paradox is cruel. Even when a man begins to resent himself for his weakness, there is still a strange shadow of dignity in that resentment. It is proof that he knows something essential has been violated. But if he ignores it long enough, even that faint recognition fades, leaving only numbness. The tragedy is not just personal, it is relational. A man who has surrendered his self-respect cannot sustain genuine intimacy. Without boundaries, his love becomes desperate. Without a voice, his presence becomes hollow. And eventually, his partner may look at him and feel what he already suspects, that the man before her is no longer the man she married. But recognition of these patterns is not condemnation, it is revelation. To see them clearly is to reclaim the first weapon against them, awareness. And awareness leads us to the next crucial step, understanding the psychological mechanics behind this erosion. Why do so many men fall into these traps? What is it about the human psyche, about the male condition in particular, that makes these sacrifices feel inevitable, even necessary? The answer lies not just in culture or circumstance, but in the very architecture of the mind. And to break free, a man must confront the illusions that have ruled him from within. Why do men walk willingly into the slow erosion of their self-respect? Why do they consent to silence, appeasement, and endless sacrifice, even when it gnaws at their dignity? The answer is not merely cultural, it is psychological. The traps men fall into are reflections of deeper illusions rooted in fear, conditioning, and an unconscious desire for safety. At the core lies the fear of abandonment. Many men grow up learning, directly or indirectly, that love must be earned. As boys, they were praised when they performed, when they obeyed, when they achieved. Rarely were they told, "You are worthy simply because you exist." This early conditioning follows them into adulthood. So in marriage, when faced with conflict, their deepest terror awakens. If I assert myself, if I demand respect, if I show the rawness of my truth, will I still be loved? Out of fear, they choose silence, even when silence corrodes them. Another root is the illusion of control through sacrifice. Many men unconsciously believe that by giving more, bending more, and working harder, they can control the outcome of love. They think, if I do enough, she will never leave. If I provide enough, I will never be unwanted. But this is a lie. Sacrifice without authenticity does not create security. It breeds dependency and hidden resentment. And resentment, once buried long enough, inevitably finds expression in bitterness or emotional withdrawal. There is also the inherited myth of masculinity. Generations of men were told that their role is to endure without complaint. Vulnerability was branded weakness. Expression of needs was seen as selfishness. So they suppress, they build walls, they convince themselves that their desires do not matter so long as the family is intact. But repression is not strength, it is self-abandonment disguised as endurance. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." This insight exposes a harsh truth. Many men believe they are making free choices in their marriages, choosing sacrifice, choosing silence, but in reality, they are compelled by unconscious drives shaped long before their wedding day. Their choices are not choices at all, but habits born from conditioning, fear, and deep-seated insecurity. These psychological roots make the erosion of self-respect almost inevitable unless interrupted by conscious awakening. The man who does not examine his motives will continue repeating the same destructive bargains, trading truth for harmony, individuality for validation, and authenticity for conditional acceptance. But here is where the paradox sharpens. The very things men think will preserve love, sacrifice, silence, and appeasement, are the same forces that destroy it. A partner may respect a man's generosity, but she cannot admire a man who has no boundaries. She may appreciate his provision, but she will not be drawn to a man who has abandoned his own vitality. Love cannot thrive in the absence of respect, and respect cannot exist where a man has ceased to honor himself. This is why the restoration of self-respect is not merely about reclaiming dignity for the man alone. It is about rescuing the relationship itself from slow disintegration. For when a man lives authentically, he not only commands respect, he revitalizes the bond. The first step toward restoration, then, is not external, it is internal. It requires a brutal honesty with oneself. Where have I betrayed myself? Where have I traded respect for comfort? Where have I chosen fear over truth? Until these questions are faced, no lasting change is possible. The journey back begins with consciousness, and from consciousness it leads to action. Specific, deliberate shifts in behavior and perspective that realign a man with his core. That is where we turn next. The rebuilding process, the reclamation of respect not through force or domination, but through integrity, boundaries, and presence. Awareness alone does not restore self-respect. A man may awaken to his patterns, may admit the ways he has betrayed himself, yet if he stops there, nothing changes. Knowledge without action is just another form of passivity. To rebuild self-respect, a man must begin to act differently. First within himself, then within his relationship. The rebuilding is not a single leap. It is a series of deliberate steps, each reclaiming a piece of the man he once was. The first step is reestablishing boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are declarations of where one ends and another begins. A man who has lost his self-respect often allowed his boundaries to dissolve in the name of love. He said yes when he meant no. He agreed when he disagreed, and he gave when he was already empty. Rebuilding begins with reclaiming the word no. When a man honors his limits, he sends a silent but powerful message. I respect myself enough not to betray myself. The second step is voicing truth without apology. Too often, men diminish their own voices, convinced that honesty will disrupt the harmony of their marriage. But harmony that exists only because of silence is not harmony at all. It is pretense. Speaking truthfully does not mean aggression, nor does it mean cold defiance. It means learning to communicate desires, frustrations, and needs with clarity and calm strength. A man who speaks with honesty, even when uncomfortable, rebuilds the bridge between himself and his dignity. The third step is reclaiming personal identity. Many men, in the grip of provision and duty, forget the passions, dreams, and pursuits that once made them alive. They abandon hobbies, friendships, and ambitions outside the marriage, believing that family responsibility requires complete self-erasure. But in reality, nothing enriches a marriage more than a man who remains connected to his individuality. To pursue a craft, to nurture a vision, to cultivate his body or his mind, these acts reignite vitality. A man who is alive in himself becomes magnetic again, not only to his partner but to life itself. The fourth step is embodying consistency. Respect is not rebuilt through grand gestures or temporary displays of strength. It is rebuilt through daily consistency, through aligning words and actions. If a man declares his boundaries but abandons them under pressure, his respect crumbles again. If he promises change but fails to live it, he teaches others not to take him seriously. Integrity is the cornerstone. Day by day, action by action, respect is not demanded but earned. First from oneself, then from others. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." For many men, the marriage will not instantly transform when they assert new boundaries or reclaim their voice. Their partner may resist, even resent, the changes at first. But the point of this rebuilding is not to manipulate the relationship into comfort. It is to transform the man into someone who refuses to live as a stranger to himself. And something remarkable happens when this transformation begins. The relationship itself often follows. A partner who once felt indifference begins to notice the man's presence again. Attraction often rekindles where there had been apathy. And even if conflict arises, it is no longer the hollow conflict of resentment but the honest friction of two authentic individuals. The rebuilding of self-respect is not about domination or control, it is about alignment. A man who lives aligned with his values, who honors his boundaries, and who refuses to betray his truth, carries a strength that cannot be ignored. But the journey does not end here. Rebuilding is the beginning. To sustain self-respect, to prevent its erosion again, a man must live by principles that anchor him no matter what storms his marriage or life may bring. This final step, sustainability of self-respect, becomes the true safeguard of his dignity. Rebuilding self-respect is a triumph, but the greater challenge lies in sustaining it. Many men awaken, reclaim their boundaries, and rediscover their voice, only to slip back into old patterns when the pressures of marriage, work, or family mount. Respect is not a single victory. It is a discipline. And like all disciplines, it requires vigilance, reflection, and a foundation built on principles that cannot be negotiated away. The first pillar of sustainability is non-negotiable authenticity. A man must refuse to live as anyone other than himself. This does not mean stubbornly clinging to flaws or refusing compromise. It means that in every decision, big or small, he refuses to betray his inner truth. If he feels wronged, he speaks. If he feels depleted, he rests. If he has a vision, he pursues it. Authenticity is not optional. It is the daily practice of aligning the inner world with the outer one. The second pillar is ritualized self-reflection. Life will always test a man's resolve. Over time, the subtle voices of fear, convenience, and conditioning will whisper again. Just let it go. Don't rock the boat. Keep the peace. To resist, a man must create deliberate moments to examine his life. Journaling, solitude, meditation, or deep conversation with trusted friends. These become the mirrors that reveal whether he is still living aligned, or whether self-betrayal has begun to creep back. Without reflection, he drifts. With reflection, he recalibrates. The third pillar is embodied strength. Self-respect cannot survive in a body that is neglected or in a spirit that is dulled by apathy. A man who disciplines his body, through exercise, through mastery of skill, through physical resilience, carries an unspoken authority. His posture itself speaks. I am present. I am capable. I am alive. Strength, both physical and psychological, fuels respect not because it intimidates, but because it reflects self-mastery. The fourth pillar is principled courage. There will always be moments where sustaining respect comes at a cost. Conflict with a partner, disapproval from family, tension at work. In these moments, the temptation to fold will be immense. But a man must choose principles over comfort. The man who bows to ease loses respect. The man who endures hardship for truth strengthens it. Sustaining dignity requires the courage to be misunderstood, disliked, even opposed, because the alternative is to be false. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." This is the ultimate reminder. Sustaining self-respect is not a one-time act, but the sum of thousands of choices. Each day, a man chooses who he is becoming. Each word he speaks, each boundary he defends, each silence he refuses to keep. All of it forms the architecture of his character. And finally, the fifth pillar, rooting respect in something greater than marriage itself. A man cannot hinge his dignity solely on the dynamics of his relationship. For if marriage falters, he collapses again. Respect must rest on something deeper, his values, his vision, his spiritual or philosophical grounding. Marriage becomes enriched by this foundation, but it does not define it. When a man's self-respect flows from a well deeper than circumstance, it endures regardless of storms. Sustaining respect, then, is not about guarding against loss. It is about living in a way where loss becomes impossible. For even if a relationship fails, even if life dismantles familiar structures, the man remains intact. He has not bartered his soul. He has not abandoned himself. He stands, perhaps wounded, but unbroken. And that is the ultimate transformation. Marriage no longer dictates his dignity. He enters it not as a man seeking validation, but as a man already whole, already respected, first by himself and then, inevitably, by others.